This is Farm Talk on Full Stroke Media. From the fields, farms, and rural communities that keep America moving. Hosted by Amy, one of the founders of the Veterans and Young Farmers Alliance. Protecting American farming, family farms, and the good Lord's lands for future generations to come. Powered by Full Stroke Media.
Welcome back to Farm Talk. I'm Amy with the Veterans and Young Farmers Alliance. In episode 1, we asked, who gets to farm America tomorrow? Then in episode 2, we asked, who owns America's farmland? And today we're going to talk about the question that comes next, because maybe you've listened to those first 2 episodes and thought, okay, Amy, I understand the problem. I understand that farmland matters. I understand that ownership matters. But what about the price? And that's where today's conversation begins. The land is there. America has millions of acres of agricultural land. So why is it so difficult for a beginning farmer to actually afford a piece of it? Why can someone have the knowledge, experience, work ethic, business idea, and desire to farm and still be completely shut out because they can't get the financing to buy the land? That's the question we're asking today. Let's start with something simple. If you want to start a farm, you need land. That sounds obvious, but what isn't obvious is everything that comes with that land. Because when someone says, I want to buy a farm, they're not just talking about buying dirt. They're potentially buying a house, a barn, fencing, water systems, wells, roads, electricity, equipment, storage, livestock facilities, irrigation, greenhouses, outbuildings, and all of the infrastructure needed to actually make that land productive. So the purchase price of the land is only one part of the equation. And this is where beginning farmers can run into a wall. They may look at a property and think, I can afford that, but then they start adding up everything else and suddenly the number is much larger. Let's imagine somebody wants to start with 40 acres. 40 acres. That doesn't sound like a massive farm. It's not thousands of acres. It's not a giant dairy. It's not a corporate agricultural operation. It's 40 acres. Maybe they want to raise cattle. Maybe they want to grow vegetables. Maybe they want a diversified operation. Maybe they want pasture. Maybe they want a combination of livestock and crops. Maybe they want a small farm that grows over time. But 40 acres still costs money. And then they need fencing, water, equipment. They need livestock if they're going to raise livestock, and they need seed if they're going to grow crops. They need insurance, operating capital, repairs, fuel. They need taxes. They need to keep the lights on, and they need enough money to survive until the farm actually generates income. That's the part that people outside agriculture sometimes don't understand. Farming isn't just about buying something and immediately making money from it. There's a development period, a startup period, a learning period, and sometimes there's a period where the farmer is putting money into the operation long before the operation gives any money back. And that's why capital matters so much. And there's another piece we have to talk about: infrastructure. Because 2 properties can have exactly the same amount of acreage and be worth dramatically different amounts to a farmer. One property might already have a functioning well, fencing, barns, electricity, road access, livestock facilities, storage, a house, equipment sheds, maybe even an established pasture. Another property might be nothing more than raw agricultural acreage. Both might be 40 acres, but they're not the same farm. And the beginning farmer has to understand that difference, because sometimes the cheaper property can actually become the more expensive property once you start building everything you need. That's why evaluating farmland isn't simply about asking what's the price per acre. You actually have to ask, what will it cost me to make this property operational? And that's a very different question. And then, of course, we have equipment. If you're raising crops, you may need tractors, implements, planters, tillage equipment, harvest equipment, trailers, storage, maintenance equipment. If you're raising livestock, you may need fencing equipment, livestock handling equipment, feed storage, water systems, shelters, trailers, and the list goes on and on. Now, not every beginning farmer needs to own every piece of equipment. There are ways to reduce those costs. Custom operators, equipment sharing, cooperatives, used equipment, leasing, contract services, creative partnerships, but those options require planning and they require knowing what your operation actually needs. Because one of the easiest ways to get into financial trouble is buying equipment before you've built a business model that can support it. You don't need $1 million equipment fleet to prove you're a farmer. You need the right tools for the job. And this brings us to something I think is incredibly important. Starting small can be smart. But starting small doesn't mean starting without a plan. Someone might say, I'm only going to start with 40 acres, and that's great. But what are you going to do with those 40 acres? Are you going to maximize livestock production? Are you going to grow specialty crops? Are you going to sell directly to consumers? Are you going to use value-added agriculture? Build a diversified operation? Are you going to lease part of the land? Are you going to expand later? The acreage doesn't determine whether the farm succeeds. The business model matters. 40 well-managed acres can be far more valuable to a beginning farmer than hundreds of acres they can't financially manage. That's an important lesson to be learned. We shouldn't automatically measure success by acreage. We should measure it by sustainability. And here's another reality. Farming doesn't always pay you immediately. You might buy land this year, prepare it this year, plant this year, and still have to wait months before you receive income. Livestock operations can take even longer to establish. Perennial crops can take years. Orchards can take years. Infrastructure improvements can take years to pay for themselves. So the farmer needs enough operating capital to survive the time between investment and income. That's where many people underestimate the true cost of starting. They think if I can buy the land, I'm ready. But buying the land is only the beginning, and that's an important lesson for anyone thinking about entering agriculture. So let's take a step back. Why is farmland so difficult for beginning farmers to afford? It's not just one thing. It's the combination. Land costs money. Infrastructure costs money, equipment costs money, livestock costs money, inputs cost money, insurance costs money, taxes cost money, repairs cost money, and the farm needs time to generate enough revenue to support all of it. That's a tremendous financial hurdle for someone starting from scratch. And that brings us to the next question. How do you actually finance all of this? That's where things get even more complicated, because having a dream of owning a farm isn't the same thing as being financially prepared to operate one, and that's where we're going to pick up in part 2. I'm Amy with the Veterans and Young Farmers Alliance. This is Farm Talk, and we will be right back.
This is Farm Talk on Full Stroke Media. From the fields, farms, and rural communities that keep America moving. Hosted by Amy, one of the founders of the Veterans and Young Farmers Alliance. Protecting American farming, family farms, and the good Lord's lands for future generations to come. Powered by Full Stroke Media.